Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Cory Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. In today's episode, we're talking about highly selective colleges and the absolutely brutal world of college admissions. Irena Smith, whose book The Golden Ticket lays bare the effect the current system can have on a family, on families everywhere, whose vision of that Ivy League acceptance letter can create a kind of tunnel vision that ignores real cracks in our kids' well-being. We talk big picture here, the need to redefine the idea of success, and for all of us parents to reflect on how we can support our kids through their school years and come out the other side in one piece. Hello, and welcome to the podcast today. I've been basically bursting to talk about what's happening in the world of the elusive, highly selective college admissions and just waiting for the right person to talk to about it. Because what I don't want to do is focus on the surface level, how to survive the process, or tips and tricks for transcripts and essays that stand out. That's really not what this podcast is about anyway. And today I have as a guest the perfect person to have a real talk conversation about what is happening to our high school kids as they navigate their future options. And the truth is, the choices families are making start way before high school. Before I officially introduce our guest, I'd like to actually read a quick passage from her recent book. I think it might get your attention. It certainly got mine. She says, college admission in highly selective colleges gives the lie to everything students and their parents have been led to believe. The aspirational narratives of the American dream, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps Horatio Alger's story, you can do all the right things. Prenatal vitamins, baby Einstein, enrichment classes, GT programs, piano, violin, soccer, swimming, baseball, private school, voice lessons, math camp, debate camp, SAT prep, and not get what you were expecting. Indeed, what you may have believed you were entitled to. College admission is arbitrary and howlingly unfair. As a matter of fact, it's a lot like life. Woo! There's a lot already to unpack there. I'm here with Irena Smith, a college admissions expert and former Stanford admissions officer. She holds a BA in English and a PhD in comparative literature, and she taught humanities and composition at UCLA and Stanford before transitioning to college admissions and writing. Her recent book, The Golden Ticket, A Life in the College Admissions Essays, is funny, heart-wrenching, and above all, really honest about the world of highly selective colleges and a large swath of our parenting cohort who hang their every hope and dream for their kids on that acceptance letter. Welcome, Irena. It is very good to have you here.
Cory, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start here. For the past 15 years, you've had a private practice helping students through the college admissions process, and you've written a book now that describes in detail that experience, weaving in your own parenting journey, which is raw, honest, eye-opening, and honestly something all parents should read, even or actually especially if your kids aren't yet in this stage of life. So you talk about raising neurodivergent kids in this world, kind of living a double life. So can we kind of dive into that piece first? Like, we're not going to start with the softball questions. Tell us what it was like feeling like, you were leading this double life.
Absolutely. So I think, Cory, the best way I could capture it is actually a scene in the book where it's a combination of many times that I've arrived home from meeting with students in my tailored skirts and fluttery blouses and nice accessories and high heels. And then I kick off my heels at the door, becoming instantly shorter, and am confronted with the chaos of our home life, which is a son who was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5, and then two younger siblings of his who also ended up struggling, probably due to a fairly chaotic home environment that they were born into, with ADHD, learning differences, depression, anxiety, and a whole slew of other things. And so to live a public life where I talked all the time about selective colleges and ways that students could differentiate themselves and ways they could build on their passions, which were already quite formidable, and then coming home to essentially battling entropy, was a very disjunctive way to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And you really go there in your book, Irena, which is one of the reasons that I really relate to it, because just of how honest it truly is. Because I don't think there's a lot of people out there who can be that honest, who are in this game, so to speak, of highly selective colleges and their kids who are those overachievers and wanting the best for them. It's very vulnerable to peel back the layers and reveal what's going on. And I mean, what I think is important about it is that I think everyone is dealing with something. Everyone has a story. And what was it that made you feel like this was the time and you needed to write this book?
Well, so the long answer is I've been writing this book for probably a couple of decades in fits and starts. And originally it started as a story of how my also highly educated husband and I were going to triumph over our oldest son's autism. And as he got older and the challenges that we were facing became more complicated, because on the one hand, he did very well with an early intervention program, and he really, I think, exceeded anything we dared hope for in some ways. And then in other ways, the fact that he did so well ended up also being an obstacle for him, because he did well enough to understand that he was just different enough from his peers where something was always going to be harder and more unreachable for him than for other people. And so he really struggled with that and had very, very severe depression in his early 20s. And so I had started there. I had a pretty quick humbling of I was not going to write the triumphing over autism narrative. And then at some point, as my children continued to struggle, it occurred to me that in large part they were struggling, and so many of the families I was working with were struggling invisibly, was because nobody ever talked about the hard parts out loud. And when I decided to do that, it was a pretty clear decision, because one of the things I always tell students when they write their essays, because the essays are obviously for the purpose of being admitted to college, is, you want to be honest, you want to be authentic, you want to show your imperfections, but only so much. You don't want to scare colleges. You don't want them to think that you're a risky admit. So you just show enough to get them interested and show that you're authentic, but not so much that they're like, oh, wow, this is a car crash waiting to happen on our campus. In my case, I've gone to college. I've gone to grad school. I live vicariously through my students every year, but I don't have a dog in the race of getting into a highly selective college. And I didn't think my story would really have as much authenticity or as much, I hope, resonance with other parents if I weren't honest about the hard parts.
Yeah, because you're not writing the tips and tricks book. Mm-mm. You're not writing the triumphant autism storybook, but you're also not writing even though the book's called The Golden Ticket, some parents might skim that title and say, oh, I need this book because I need the golden ticket and I need to know how to get it. And Irena was, a Stanford's admissions officer, so she probably knows how to get the golden ticket. Mm-hmm. But that's not what this story is.
It's absolutely not. And one of the reasons I really love the title, which shout out to my husband for coming up with it, is that in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which the title alludes to, the golden ticket for 4 out of the 5 children who enter the chocolate factory is not really a gift. If anything, it's a ticket to physical and emotional suffering and upheaval, and in some ways, disfigurement. And so it's a be careful what you ask for image or symbol, I think, as well as many other golden things in literature that prove to be potentially dangerous. So my goal was to have a tongue-in-cheek title that maybe if people came to it in search of the golden ticket would, I hope, allow them to see that it's a very laden and fraught image, and maybe think twice about what you wish for.
Yeah, it is a cautionary tale for those of us who have kids who haven't reached that stage yet. You know, my kids are not quite there yet. They're close to that high school, not quite there yet. And so many parents listening, I think, are in that same boat and like vaguely kind of hear about, oh, it's crazy in college admissions these days, but don't have that tangibly in front of them. So the cautionary tale is what? Like what's the gist that you want maybe parents of younger kids to come away with the book, you know,
Right.
what message?
So I think the message is let your kid be your kid, because I think, and I found this particularly for parents in even as early as elementary school, everything starts to be held subordinate to this calculus of, is this going to be good for my child getting into college? And I don't think that that should be the calculus. The calculus should just be, is this good for my child right now? And if they're not particularly interested in STEM, or if they're not particularly interested in a sport that you keep waking them up early in the morning for to go to practice, then maybe try to figure out what they are interested in and let them lead the process rather than holding out to them what they should be. Because I think it's a pretty heavy burden for particularly ever younger kids to carry, knowing that whatever they're doing is or is not adding up to a perfect college application.
And can you, you know, after the many years that you've been doing this, can you pinpoint why parents are in this space? Like, why does our generation think that that acceptance letter from Stanford is the be all end all? Like, where did that focus come from?
That's a great question. And I'm not a sociologist, so I can't pinpoint the precise moment that that happened. But I will point an accusatory finger at the US News and World Report, which started ranking colleges in 1983. And by 1990, I think that idea of quote unquote top colleges was pretty enshrined in our national consciousness as, you know, you only want the top 10, which, or maybe the top 20 if you have to. And it made it so that essentially the US News and World Report rankings created a climate of artificial scarcity where it was like, these are the coveted schools, and the harder it is to get into them, the more coveted they are, which is how the US News and World Report works. That's kind of the mechanism of scarcity that makes the colleges more desirable. And the harder it becomes to get into those schools, the more attractive they become, until at this point, Stanford tops out at a 3.7 acceptance rate. And of course, everybody looking at that thinks, why not me? Forgetting conveniently that 96.3% of them are not going to be admitted. So I blame the US News and World Report in some part, but I also don't think it's just Stanford. I think there's been a mythology created about the Ivy Leagues, about Stanford, about other peer institutions that have very consciously positioned themselves to be, if you can't get into an Ivy, Chicago is the next logical step, or Duke, or Northwestern. And I'm not saying those aren't great schools, but there are a couple thousand more other great schools that don't have a 96.3% rejection rate. And somehow they're not attractive because apparently they'll just accept anyone.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's really setting all of us up for failure. And like you say in the book, it's a lottery. It's not a meritocracy. Because when you just said, you know, they're conveniently forgetting that 96% don't get in, I think the parents are thinking, well, those 96% they don't have the application that my kid has. They're not envisioning that. I don't know what the percentage is, but I bet you the kids who apply to Stanford and these other schools all have amazing on the face of it, transcripts full of, all of those activities that I listed off at the beginning, that people think that that's the way to get in. But the truth is that's the baseline. And then it's a lottery.
Exactly. And the kids who are probably more likely to get in, and this is the thing again that I don't think a lot of families want to think about, are either future or present Olympians, students who hold several patents. Although even 5 or 6 years ago, I had a student who held 2 patents who was not admitted to Stanford. So MIT has a blog post about not admitting a student who built a working nuclear reactor in his garage. So, but that's a level of competition. And a kid who is, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but captain of the varsity tennis team who has done AI summer camps for 2 summers in a row before senior year is going to be one of many, many high achieving students that colleges like the highly coveted, highly rejected schools will ultimately reject.
So what I want to do, and the reason this podcast is called Forget What You Learned, is how do we start to undo that so that we're not causing our kids to have anxiety, depression, all of these complex family dynamics that emerge that are so damaging just to their happiness. That's what I just keep asking is, what is the end goal here? I want my kids to be happy. I want them to move out of my basement. I don't want a failure to launch situation. That bar is pretty low, but I mean, isn't that the root of it, is that it's not the acceptance letter to Stanford we want for our kids. It's their happiness and productivity as a member of society. So how do we start to change the conversation around college to get at that?
So I'm really glad you asked that question, because my husband and I learned the hard way by parenting our 3 children, who have taught us an enormous amount about not necessarily the right things to do. I'm not here to give parenting advice, but ways in which to have a healthier relationship with your children. And I think the number one place to start is to listen to them and to ask questions and to get curious about what it is that they want. I think that a lot of the stress that teens and even younger students experience is because there's sort of an implicit understanding that either comes from their parents or from their schools or from both, that of course you're going to college, of course it's going to be a good college, of course you're going to be subscribing to an extracurricular activity every second of every day that you have available from school, unless you're doing homework, and probably you'll be doing homework in the car on the way to the extracurricular activity. And I don't think that parents pause enough to ask how their kids feel about that, and whether they're actually happy and fulfilled, and whether this is an activity that they would do even if no one were looking, because it actually makes them happy. Obviously, barring petty vandalism and other antisocial behaviors, in which case that's not going to help anybody. But I do think that getting a sense of what is your kid showing you that they're interested in, and how can you support that without making it a thing? Because I think all of us as parents are occasionally guilty of, your kid draws a decent picture and you're like, oh, art lessons immediately. Or, look at you made scrambled eggs. Let's sign you up for a summer culinary experience. Maybe that's not a thing that they're interested in. Maybe they just drew a picture one time. But if they're constantly drawing and you ask them if that is something that they're interested in, then that opens the door for their interest to be genuinely there. So I think just that sense of curiosity about who is your kid and what does your kid want is really important. And then I think the other thing is just really accepting kids where they are. And that took me and my husband a really long time to learn, that sometimes they will not launch. Sometimes they will come back home because they need to, not necessarily because they want to. And the best you can do is figure out how to make that work, and how you can support them without obviously enabling them to be living with you until they're 50, which is, I don't think, anybody's goal. But I think there's also a lot to be said for the old country model of several generations living together. Sometimes that can be supportive too.
That's true. It doesn't have to be a bad thing if everybody's on the same page. But it's funny, while you were talking, it was making me think that, the only way that we can sort of get to that place in parenting is to release the sense of accountability we feel when our kids are not following the traditional path. Like there's a visceral reaction to, what did I do wrong here? If my kids are not, doing all of the things or checking all the boxes, if they just like to doodle, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be the next Picasso, maybe they want to do an art class, and there's not an end point. There's not a goal. It's just to allow them to experience life. But I think there's a hesitation of parents to do that, because then it feels like on a subconscious level that we've done something wrong.
Exactly. And it took me and my husband a very long time to stop in this thinking of, I have failed as a parent if my children aren't doing X, Y, and Z. And I will freely admit that I had a lot of ego in this game, because I work with really high achieving students. Not always. I've had students as well along the way who have really struggled academically. But I work with students who are ambitious and accomplished and have their sights set quite high. And it's, how could I be that person but also have children who are struggling, or who aren't in college, or who started college and then realized it wasn't for them? And I think that one of the main things that parents can do to help both themselves and their kids is divorce themselves from, not obviously from their children, but from the outcome. Their children are still their children. You are going to love them and care about them for the rest of your life. But what they do is not and cannot be a reflection of who you are, no matter what you think or what other people think. They are their own beings. So
yeah. There's so much work there, to be done, because I think the helicopter parenting model, it's our egos are so entwined in, what our kids do, and they're not really seen as separate beings from us, it's tough. So
just to jump in really quickly, that individuation, I think, is really important. And I really came home to me viscerally when my oldest son was probably 4 or 5 months old, and we were in a mom and baby group, and everybody else's baby was sitting quietly on a blanket or in their car seat playing with toys. And all my son wanted to do was just crawl out the door that, of course, was on the second floor. And so I kept having to get up and get him and bring him back. And I had this startling realization that he had a mind of his own. And even though I really badly wanted him to sit on his blanket and play with toys like other children, he had zero interest in doing that. And I had no control over what he actually wanted and was doing. And then, of course, I completely forgot that moment of realization and went right into, yes, I can control the outcome. And I think, too, to your point about goals, parents imposing their goals on their kids out of a sense of ego or a sense that they're doing their best for their children is totally understandable. But I think the one thing that's really important to remember is children don't think of goals or don't have goals in the same way that adults have goals. Adults think, 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Children think, when is snack? Obviously young children, or when is school over today so I can go do whatever. And I think it's really important to respect that, because if you are teaching them to think, what about my future when they're 13 or 14 years old, future with a capital F, you're essentially shortening their childhood, because they're going to have their entire adult life to think about their future. And I think that if they're going to have this protected window of time to think about, who am I in this moment? What am I learning? They're going to end up, I think, being happier, more independent, more self-actualized, even though I hate that word, kids.
I mean, I think that's actually the whole point here, is that we are not following child development principles and brain science and just where kids are, that is I agree with you. Kids are in the moment, and the minute that you take away that feeling for them that they are just enjoying something, they stop owning it. Like I discovered as a parent, I have 3 kids. I don't have that much help at home. So whenever we sign up for an activity, it's like, this is on me to get them there and do all the things. I actually decided, like, we're going to make them beg to do an activity. Like, they don't get to do it the second they ask for it. And I'm certainly not going to go from, oh, he's kicking the soccer ball, let's put him in the select tournament team who practices 4 times a week and has tournaments all weekend. Because all of a sudden it's like, well, no, I just wanted to, like, kick a soccer ball around a little bit.
And all of a sudden you made it a thing. I love that. And, your kids will absolutely tell you when they really, really want something. I think anybody who has ever been in a supermarket with a child knows that they are very unembarrassed about letting you know what they want and how much they want it and how many times they want it until you actually get it for them. And so making it a thing where, as soon as they kick a soccer ball, you're like, okay, we're getting coaching and we're going to play for a club team that practices all day long on Saturdays and Sundays and travels to tournaments. If they didn't initiate that, it's probably going to mean more to you than it will to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also made me think of, when you were talking about, like, what kids need to experience, like having a childhood. Also, isn't that what college used to be for? Like it used to be for getting a general liberal arts degree and, like, I majored in philosophy in college. I mean, I didn't become a professor, but I loved reading all of the classical works and having those conversations with people. I don't think that's the point of college anymore.
Right. Well, college has become, I think, an investment. And in addition to that, sort of, I guess, a status signifier, because obviously the more selective a college or rejective a college your child goes to, the higher ostensibly their status and your status by reflection as their parent, because clearly if your child is at a highly rejective university, you must be the best parent in the world. I'm being a little facetious, but I think that's the subliminal thinking. And because college has become so monstrously expensive, even public schools, over the last 20 years, I don't think college is seen as a place to play anymore. It's not a place where you can take, fiction of monsters or literature of monsters for fun, even if you're not an English major and just read Frankenstein. And I think that's really, really unfortunate, because it's seen as kind of, this is the next step to your professional development. How much is your degree worth? Which is a little ironic, because the hundreds and thousands of kids who have flocked to computer science over the past 10 or 12 or 13 years are potentially going to be outsourced by the technology that they created in large language learning models. So that's not necessarily always the path to success either. And not all colleges cost $80,000 or more. And there are actually affordable options, including community college for kids who are not 100% sure that this is what they want to do, that most parents don't want to talk about, because in affluent, highly educated communities, that is a mark of shame. Why would you go to a college that accepts everyone? So I think the cost of college and what is seen, I think, wrongly as its function, is really contributing to that very narrow pathway of, this is how you become successful, is not just by going to college, but going to a good college and majoring in this practical thing, which is definitely no longer seen as philosophy or English or a lot of the humanities.
Also, what 18 to 22-year-old is that good at being so focused and future driven? And I mean, it just is kind of going against their nature. So therein lies the source of all of the mental health difficulties. It's like, no, you're not allowed to just, go to a frat party and, drive somewhere for the weekend with your friends, because you have to be laser focused on what's next. And then what happens is the kids break down and things happen. They have to quit school, come home, or worse, and yeah. And I think the other thing, and just, this is not meant to be a pitch for
chores necessarily, but I guess it kind of is. There are many students who arrive at college with no idea about how to do their own laundry or how to navigate an interpersonal difficulty with their roommate or with a professor, because their parents have really sort of cleared the path for them to be so focused on their academic and extracurricular success that the very prosaic but necessary activities of daily living and just adulting and surviving in the world are left behind. And then when they get to college and have to function on their own, it's really tough.
But they also didn't have time for that, Irena. They didn't have time to do their laundry and learn how to cook because they had 5 AP classes. And
exactly. It's important to keep up and not with the laundry.
Yeah. And then we just drop them off at college and say, good luck to you. And having had that singular focus of the acceptance letter and again, like that's what I always think about. It's like, if that's your end goal is getting to the acceptance letter, I don't think anyone's really thinking about what's coming after that. It's just, oh, and then you'll be successful and then you'll do this. But there's a lot of steps along the way that really involve not the parent. Just the kid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I think we need to lighten the mood a little bit. I like to do this lightning round where we just ask you some silly questions. And so let's do that.
Okay.
And then I will let you tell us where we can find you. Okay. Sound good?
Great. Yes.
Okay. The first question is like, what's your favorite education or parenting book?
So it's not actually technically either an education or a parenting book, but I really love Ali Broche's book, Hyperbole and a Half, that came out in 2010. It's a graphic novel, not even a novel, I take it back. It's a collection of comic strips. She's a brilliant illustrator. It's about her childhood as well as her adulthood, as well as her hilarious interactions with her parents. There's one piece in there called The Year Kenny Loggins Ruined Christmas that makes me literally lie down on the floor because I'm laughing so hard every time I read it. And it really just beautifully captures what it's like to be a kid, and in her case, kind of a weird kid. And it gives a very sympathetic view of her parents from her point of view as well.
I love that. Okay, putting that one on my list too. Okay, what do you do in your free time? I'm sure you have so much of it now.
Exactly. So much free time. So I read usually 2 or 3 books at a time, and usually by leaving them all over the house because I like to have them widely available wherever the mood strikes me. And I also do improv comedy with my husband, which is a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, I loved that whole, like picturing that whole scene of the two of you in the book. That's great. Okay, the third one is in one word, what do you think kids today need more of?
Books. Sorry, I have to say that, but yeah.
Yep. Actually, on the side note, after reading your book, I just interrogated all 3 of my kids about why they don't have a book. All of my kids have loved to read from the word jump, and for some reason we're in a rut now. And after your book, I'm like, you guys need to get some. Let's go to the library. So thank you for that.
I'm so glad that you did that. And I can't tell you how many students I've had who were passionate readers in elementary and middle school, and then high school. And again, kind of the chase of prestige activity, structured time has beaten their love of reading out of them. And I really think that we all could do with reading more.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Okay. What's your favorite feel-good song?
Iko Iko in the Dixie Cups version.
Love it. Okay. And lastly, if you could summon one thing to your desk with like a magic button, what would it be?
Probably a flat white coffee from this place called Bluestone Lane that's not too far from us. And they have these beautiful turquoise cups. And I want it to come just like that in the beautiful turquoise cup.
Lovely. How many of those a day would you have if you could?
I would try to temper it, but I would say 2 or 3, and then I would have to cut myself off. Yeah,
that's fair. All right. Well, thank you for being a good sport about the lightning round. And lastly, what where can people find you? Just tell us that. We'll put all of that in the show notes, but let us know what you have going on.
Great. So people can find me on my website, which is irenasmith.com. They can find me on Twitter under irena.writes, and they can find me on my Facebook author page, which is just Irena Smith Author.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation, Irena. Like I said, I've really been looking forward to it and absolutely loved your book and really recommend that every parent pick up a copy. There's some parts that are very funny before, like you said, gets to the dark stuff. It's lovely. So thank you for joining me today.
Cory, this was so fun. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Cory Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.